You would never do this if the platter was passed to you, but like I passed it to myself, so. In this chapter, I am going to demonstrate how to make a rosemary roasted bistecca, which is my adaptation of Florence's famous bistecca alla Fiorentina.
When you think of Italian cooking, you may not think of steak, but actually Florence is known for steak.
It is a porterhouse just like this one that they season with nothing but salt and sear over a live fire until it's very rare. My method takes that inspiration but adapts it to an indoor technique. It's called the reverse sear method. So we're gonna start the steak low and slow and then finish it fast and hot to get nice browning and searing at the end. And just because I wanted to up the ante a little bit, my steak is seasoned with rosemary, salt, black pepper, and served with fresh lemon. Before you even start cooking anything, you need to procure a really beautiful steak. This meal is meant to be shared, and it is worth going to get the best steak that you can afford. When you go into the butcher, ask them for a porterhouse cut with a large fillet. This side is the fillet. On the other side, you have a New York strip. It's one of the reasons why the steak is so fabulous. You get 2 cuts in one. Make sure your butcher knows that you want to have it 2.5 inches thick. They're gonna think that you're crazy until you tell them, I'm making bistecca alla Fiorentina, and then they're gonna know exactly what you're talking about. So buy a great steak, make sure it's the thickness that you want, and make sure it's the cut that you asked for. If you cannot get a porterhouse, you can ask for a T-bone. T-bone is cut with a smaller fillet, still an excellent choice. And if there's no T-bones, ask them for a bone-in ribeye, again, cut 2.5 inches thick. To start the dry rub, I'm going to start by taking this rosemary sprig and I'm just gonna pinch the stem with my fingertips and kind of run them down the length of the stem to pull off the leaves. And then up here where it's more tender, I'm just plucking those off. I have a memory of actually being in Florence with my parents and going to a restaurant and ordering the bistecca alla Fiorentina. And it was presented very, very simply with just salt. But I remember on the platter, there were a couple of sprigs of rosemary sitting there. And I've taken that memory and folded it into the flavoring for this dish. The aromas of the rosemary are going to penetrate the meat while it is sitting with the dry rub. And then finally chop it. So now that I've got my rosemary, I'm gonna add it to this bowl along with 2 tablespoons of kosher salt. If you are using fine salt, cut that amount in half. Otherwise the steak will be too salty. Now I've got a teaspoon of black pepper. So now I wanna make sure that the steak is seasoned everywhere, not just on the top and the bottom, but the fat side, the outside, even the bone should get some seasoning. I'm just pressing the fat side into this dry rub to pick up the seasonings. Now that I've gotten 99.9% of the dry rub on, I'm gonna drizzle with a little bit of olive oil. This is really just to help that dry rub stick while it's sitting in the fridge. I'm just going to nestle the steak into this zip top bag and stand it up on the bone end and then actually leave it open in the fridge. Having it open is great for air circulation so that the steak continues to dry out, and that will ultimately just help me get an even better sear at the end of the road. This steak has been in the fridge for 24 hours. And when it first comes out, you're not gonna notice a ton of difference in what it looked like when it went in there. The herbs are a little bit darker than they were when they were bright green, just because they've oxidized, and the salt isn't as noticeable because it is hydrated sitting on the surface of the meat. So let's talk about the reverse sear method. This is a very large cut of meat. It is very challenging to cook it in a way that is going to be evenly cooked through if you just did that on a stovetop or even on a grill. What happens as you're cooking is the outside, the most outer layer is in the closest contact with the heat of the pan. So that edge is gonna get cooked really well. In fact, it's gonna get well done, and it's gonna take forever for that heat that's only on the surface to get all the way to the center of this protein. By the time the center hits medium rare, you're gonna have a really big ring of medium well to well done meat all around the edge where it was taking such a long time to get to the center of the meat. The reverse sear method is genius, and I didn't invent it, because you actually start at a low temperature, allowing the meat to kind of evenly come up to temperature. So what I'm looking for a perfect medium rare is for this steak to hit 125 degrees. I've got my oven set to 300. I'm going to use a temperature probe to make sure that I hit that temperature and don't miss it. If you don't have a probe thermometer, that's totally fine. I would definitely recommend getting any kind of digital thermometer or analog thermometer that you can use to check the temperature of the meat as it's coming up to that perfect medium rare. So with the probe thermometer, I'm going to just go into the thickest part of the meat, avoiding the bone. I want to be pretty much dead center. All right, this gorgeous steak is ready for its journey. The entire cooking time will take between 60 minutes and 80 minutes, maybe 90 minutes, depending on the exact proportions and thickness of the steak that you bought. It's been an hour and 20 minutes for my steak to get to that perfect 125, and now I'm gonna take it out of the oven. It doesn't look like much, and that is because why would it? It was in a low oven. It is cooked on the interior perfectly. The last step that I have to do is get this exterior nice and brown and seared, which is what everybody wants to see when they sit down to a steak. In the time that the steak is resting, I am going to pull together some very quick and easy little condiments to serve on the side. So essentially what I'm going to do with these shallots is make a really quick little lemon pickle. I think the brightness and the little bit of crunch from the shallot is a nice break from the fatty richness of the steak. So I'm just slicing as thinly as I can manage. If you go a little bit thicker than I am, it's totally fine. They're going to soften and wilt while they sit in the lemon juice and salt. Okay. I'm going to squeeze half a lemon over to start. The lemon here is really acting as like a light, fast pickling liquid. The lemon is going to soften the shallot and season it, make it even brighter. Essentially, it's just like a quick shallot pickle. Some salt in there too. And I'm just gonna use a fork and my fingertips to stir this. Just set that aside. And then anchovies might seem like a funny accompaniment. They have this briny saltiness that is going to be an amazing companion to the rich flavors of that delicious aged meaty steak. To top off these anchovies, just a little cracked black pepper. The condiments are done. Now I can go ahead and sear the steak. This is a 12-inch cast iron skillet that I have preheating over medium-high heat. I'm just gonna drizzle the surface with a little bit of olive oil. This is less for seasoning than it is as a way to make sure that the heat is being conducted from the surface of the pan to the meat. And I want to do this pretty quickly. I want to get really good browning in a short amount of time because the steak is already cooked perfectly. I don't really want to get the interior super heated up. This is just for surface. One word of caution, your kitchen is going to get smoky. Open the window, open the back door, open the front door. I'm gonna turn on my hood. The whole process for searing the steak should take about 6 to 8 minutes. I'm gonna turn it back and forth a couple times. So 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and then 2 minutes, and then 2 more minutes. As soon as it goes in, I want to press down either side till I hear that sizzle. And that will just make sure that the surface of the steak is making great contact with the hot pan. Now that I have really great browning on both sides of the steak, I'm gonna tilt it so it sits up on this fatty side so I can get some browning there too. That will take 1 to 2 minutes. And then at the very end, I'm just gonna upend it onto the bone side again for 1 to 2 minutes until I get a little bit of light browning. Now I'm gonna turn it onto the filet side. It doesn't have quite the fat cap that the other side does, but definitely deserves to get a little browning. I have beautiful browning on all sides. I'm gonna return the steak to the pan that it cooked on. Let it hang out for a few minutes so that it's not screaming hot when I try to carve it. And get your hot pan off the fire. Time to carve. This steak makes it really easy for you to figure out where to cut. I'm gonna cut the strip side off one side. I'm gonna cut the fillet off the other, just following the curve of the bone. It's a little different on the underside, so if I hit bone, I'm just gonna wiggle my knife around. And then once the meat is taken off in 2 big pieces, then I will slice it. Let's just take a moment to appreciate how evenly pink that is. It's really nicely cooked. I just want to carve this against the grain. All that means is that the long strands of protein in the meat run in a direction. And if you cut against that grain, essentially you shorten those protein strands. Long protein strands are like ropey, chewy steak. When you cut against them, it makes for a more tender bite. And looking at the steak, the grain is essentially running this way. So I'm just gonna angle my knife and cut against it. I'm gonna serve the steak on this board. I have a few sprigs of rosemary here, and something I like to do is put the bone back so everybody can see what a gorgeous steak you started with, and then essentially put the slices back the way they came off. Resting the cut steak on these fresh sprigs of rosemary, the warmth of the steak is gonna release the essential oils from the rosemary, and that will just perfume lightly the steak slices as they sit. The outside of the steak is really well and gorgeously seasoned. I'm just going to make sure that the inside parts of those slices get a little action. The steak is really the main attraction, right? This is why you're here. But to go with, I just have some really simply prepared creamy white beans with salt, pepper, and olive oil on them, and a gorgeous salad with a simple shallot vinaigrette. Since I'm the first one to take a bite, I just get chef's pick. I'm gonna go right in center. Couple of shallots. Have an anchovy on the side and a little squeeze of lemon. Oh my God, so tender, but has the perfect amount of chew. I love it with the shallot. You can really taste the rosemary, even though it was just on the surface. It has completely infused the flavor of the steak all the way to the center. A bright, crunchy salad is kind of all you need as far as a vegetable goes on the side. Salad and beans are great, but I'm gonna have another bite of steak. This time with a little anchovy. How's the original surf and turf? That is a perfectly cooked steak, if I must say so myself. In this chapter, I showed you how to make a rosemary roasted bistecca, which is my adaptation of Florence's famous bistecca alla Fiorentina, and how to use the reverse sear method to ensure that large cuts of meat are perfectly cooked every single time. Enjoy.